Good morning, everyone. It's our 10:30 session for AT with Chris Hodgins from IBM, who's come to share this marvellous new resource creation tool. I'm very excited by it. If anyone's got any questions, Chris, I hope you're okay if we interrupt you during your presentation.
Yes,
obviously, everybody's on mute, so their questions will have to go on chat, folks. And Nick Garrett, who's chat monitor, has been for the last few sessions, will leap on your chat questions and ask them on your behalf to Chris. I hope that works all right, but we can't unmute everyone because it just gets a bit chaotic, unfortunately. So without further ado, Chris, if you'd like to present us and tell us all about this new CICS resource definition for target environments tool.
Great, thank you. So yes, so we've and I think I may have confused everyone with this one. The title, CICS resource configurations for target environments. It's probably not our finest title ever. So today we're going to be talking about a new capability in CICS 5.6 called the resource override tool. Sorry, the resource override capability. And we'll also touch on another tool later on at the end called the CICS resource builder, which is new to the CICS open beta. We have a 0.1 release out there, and it's designed to work in tandem with resource overrides as well for to assist you with your environments and your automation. So, without further ado, let's kick this off. So, the problem space we're exploring here is that you want to get your applications into a production-ready state and deploy them through your pipeline, through development, through test, and into production. But there's a level of pragmatism required here to do such things, because we know that in development, we have lots of differences, lots of changes. Our banking application we have here, version 1.0.3, might look quite different in development. It's got things like JVM server names that might be different, using different Apple IDs, different data sets. It might well have some tooling support. It might have TCP/IP services which use different ports, or URI maps using different paths. And all of these things come together to have a development environment which is really great for our developers. But as we move that environment to test, it has to change. We lose some of those values. Maybe the Apple IDs change, maybe data sets change, and that flows into test. We've maybe still got different JVM server names from production. And so you start asking yourself, well, what am I really testing? Am I really testing the thing that is going to flow into production here? We don't really want to keep making all these different changes to our application. Really, in an ideal world, that application should be an immutable bundle that we just don't touch, and it should flow through these different pipeline stages really untouched. But again, we have to be pragmatic about this. There's really no easy answer. There is a need to tolerate differences in different environments, but ideally, we protect the application from those changes as much as we can. So we do have the question that, is the testing as close to production as possible? How do we avoid making application changes for each different environment? How do we deal with situations where, for example, developers, you might well have different instances of the same CICS region for each developer with its own set of data sets that are unique, with its own Apple IDs, the ports. All these things could be very much dependent on who is running that system and in what pipeline stage. So we want to be able to control and manage those differences. But we also don't want to leave that to tribal knowledge. We know that we have people retire or people change teams or move on, and you have to deal with it. Well, it always worked that way, but there's no reasoning behind why it works that way or why we needed those differences in different environments, and we lose that knowledge. So we want to be able to put that information somewhere that we can store, somewhere that we can understand and maybe even version. And then that helps us again when it comes to identifying when problems do go wrong and do happen. How do we get back to where these things changed, and can we identify those changes? So to answer that, we've brought in a new capability to CICS itself called resource overrides. And what this intends to do is it intends to take all that tribal knowledge, all your differences between different environments, packages it up inside of a YAML file, which is sort of a nice, easy to read format, and allows you to bring that along with your CICS region. You can bring it into your CICS region configuration, and as the region comes up with your banking application, the development overrides will be applied to that application resources as they're installed, and they will apply any of the changes you need for the development environment, say, and then same for test, you'll have your own test overrides. But maybe there's less test overrides than there were for development because we're trying to get closer and closer to production, and we have a production application here that we're trying to override. And finally, as they flow to production, we might have some overrides, but really this is now the production level environment. Our banking application hasn't changed at all through this process. All the resource definitions that came along with this banking application are still intact, and we have just slowly removed more and more of the overrides until we end up with maybe just a very core set required for production. So the resource overrides capability gives us the ability to specify overrides, first of all, place them into source code management. They are UTF-8 format, they are YAML, so they're easy to read, they're easy to put in source code management along with any other configuration artifacts you have. And CICS also provides a JSON schema with that. Now, you can use that in tandem with a supported editor to view your YAML, to work with your YAML, and it will give you assistance where you make changes. So it will allow you to autocomplete, it will allow you to get hover help, it will allow you to get instant validation and problems back onto your editor instantly while you're changing it. So you can have confidence that what you are configuring in CICS is at least a valid structure, so that when CICS receives it, it should work and should validate pars and should apply the overrides correctly. So once you've specified them, the next move obviously is to install your production CICS resources. And with the resource overrides file applied, you'll be able to select the resources based on any attribute you want in those resource types. You'll be able to carry out overrides on them that involve setting fields, finding and replacing string values, prefixing attribute values, suffixing resource attribute values, and even going on to do things like injecting built-in symbols that we provide along with resource overrides that you can inject into your resource definitions at install time. Now that is something that was a big ask for quite a while now in terms of our requests for enhancements, our RFE process, where our users can request new features for CICS. That's quite a popular one where we wanted to be able to push symbols from the runtime environment into the resource definitions in the region as they're installed. And obviously, thirdly, we need to be able to check this. We need to be able to monitor that this all went successfully, make sure that we get some good error messages back, make sure we can see what was overridden, where's that audit trail. We want to look at what the values were, what errors happened. So all that usual goodness that you would expect with any new CICS capability. So let's go on and let's talk a little bit about how we would even go about specifying these resource overrides. So I'd say they come in this YAML format, which is quite straightforward to read and use, and you should be able to look at any of these examples and sort of at least be able to guess at what they're trying to do. So in this case, we have at the very top, we have a transaction that we are selecting for resource overrides. And here we have a selector, and in this selector, we are saying, well, we're selecting a transaction with a name BK asterisk. So BK and then any number, 0 or more characters following that. So the name has to be set to that. The program name has to be set to BK asterisk web. So the asterisk in this case appearing between the other characters, meaning that we will have 0 or more characters in there for the program name as well. And similarly for the group, we just have a fixed value here. Group must be bank web. And each of these selector entries, the attribute values, is taken together, and we add all these selection items together. So the transaction must have the name BK star, it must have a program name BK star web, and it must have a group bank web. So together that forms one selection criteria for the transaction. Now, on the bottom left, we have a program selector. And here we're saying for a program that's going to be installed, if it matches a name of BK Star Web or and has a group bank web and also a CEDF value of no, then we will select this program. So all we're trying to do at this point is just select very specifically which resources we want to select to apply the overrides to. And you can be as specific as you want, or you could be as relaxed about this as you want. It's completely up to you to decide how you want to select the resources. On the bottom right, we see a slightly more advanced syntax, if you like. We're selecting a file here, and this time around we've said the name attribute. And underneath the name attribute, instead of just specifying a value that we expect to select on, we've broken that out into a set of selector items. Here we have the use of is, and is all that's saying is the name is bank star, and we're also saying that the name is not bank cust. So these two are also anded together. So here we're saying that it must be a bank star, but it cannot be specifically bank cust out of those two options. And then again, we have the group bank data, and they are all pulled together in that one selector, so they all have to be true for this file to be selected.
Hey, Chris, it's Nick. We've just had a question. Is there an OR option?
An OR option, yes. Yes, I think you can have multiple selectors to do an OR selection. So you'd have a second selector to do that.
Thanks, mate.
Okay. And then following that, so that was is and not. Now you notice on the top and the bottom left, we don't specify as the default value, the default selector we use here is that the name is BK star, for example, at the top. So is the default, and if you want something different other than is, then you have to break it out into these sections so that you have the is and the not fields. We also support these other two, literal and literal not. So let's have a look at these. So they are effectively the same. They map very in the same way to literal. Literal maps to is and literal not maps to not. The difference is that here you can no longer specify the asterisk any longer. What you have to do now is you now have to any value you put in, any special character you use will be treated as that character and not tried to be manipulated as part of the selector. So here we're saying that URI map has a selector. Its name must be BK URI web, and the host value is the literal not, and that means that the host value must not be star, and that is a star value, and it doesn't mean that there are 0 or more characters in the host. It literally means that the asterisk character cannot be the value that the host contains. And then they have an NQ model, which contains a selector, which has the selector has in it the NQ name, and that has a selector of a literal NQ star. So again, the NQ name attribute of this NQ model must match ENQ asterisk, where asterisk is not a 0 or more character indicator. So going from selecting, so these have all so far been about selecting the resource. But once you've selected the resource, we obviously now want to come in and we want to apply an override to it. And to apply the override, what we have is we have the override section here, and in there we have support for a set, which is the default option. So very similar to how we have with is, where if you have the name is in the selector, it's equivalent to just specifying the value. For overrides, exactly the same. We have override. So here we've got CEDF yes, which is effectively doing a set of the value yes. And you can see that in the bottom right, where we've broken that out. And here we have actually said that the CEDF value must be set to yes. Now that's a simple case. That's nice, easy. You can see how that applies. So here we select the program, and what we're saying here at install time, if this program matches our selector, if the name and group matches, then we will override the CEDF attribute and force it to be yes. So moving on from that, we also support a prefix and a suffix option. Now this is pretty handy. This says things like, so if we've got a file here and we've file, and we want to override the DS name attribute, so the dataset name. And here we're saying that we want to force a prefix in there of dev dot and a suffix of dot dummy. And so if the original value of the DS name in the file was, for example, test value, then when we finish doing this override, the value we're left with will have dev.testValue.dummy. That'll be the new DS name attribute, and that's what will be installed into the system. So we also have this find replace option. And this is also quite handy if you have a situation where you have a specific production values, and maybe you've got a development region and you want to swap out those production values for the development specific values. Here again, we've got a URI map selector. We have override, and we have said the path value. If you find the string prod anywhere inside the path, then you'll want to replace that out with the value dev. Now, prod and dev could be interchanged, obviously, with any string value you like, but that gives you the flexibility to search for a string in a value and replace it out with something else. Okay, so we've done selector, we've done override. Now let's look at the symbols. So we brought in a set of symbols at 5.6, which we've now extended in the CICS TS Open Beta. So currently we're supporting in 5.6 the Apple ID, the default user ID, the LPAR, a region user ID, the CICS release, and the CICS SysID. So what we can do with these is we can say that we're going to select the file, we're going to override it, but here we're saying the DS name for the file we're going to prefix, and we've used these curly brackets. So the two left curly brackets, and we have the CICS region user ID inside that. That's the symbol name, and then we close out the symbol with two curly brackets. You can see there's some white space in there, and that doesn't matter. That's just eaten up by the parser. But those, the combination of the two left curly brackets, the symbol name, and the closing curly brackets is what gives us the symbol identifier. And so here we put a prefix in of the CICS region user ID, and we've also done a find for dot prod dot. So we're looking for a part of the dataset name that says dot prod in it, and we're replacing that with dot and then the CICS LPAR name and dot. So you can imagine situations where you might want to do something like that, where you do have production values, and maybe you're rolling out a test, and each test you have files that are very specific for each. A data set that is specific for each LPAR. Okay, now that's 5.6. Now in the open beta, we've introduced a few new symbols as well, based on, I think it's the RFEs that came in and just general use. So we've added in a few extra override symbols. We have a prefix of the CICS SysID. We have the job name symbol. We have a sysplex symbol. We have a USS config and USS home symbols, which return the corresponding values that were taken out of the set parameters. So you can inject those symbols into your resources as well. And I see there's a few questions, Nick, I think.
So if it's convenient, Chris, Sharon from, I think from NatWest, I may be doing her a huge disservice there. She was the person who had the original is there an or option, but she's not convinced that she understands or has got the answer that she's looking for. What I propose is I'll just ask her to unmute so that she can articulate the question to you now. Is that okay, Chris?
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
Okay, Sharon, I'm gonna request that you unmute. Are you there, Sharon? Hello, Sharon. Are you speaking?
No, I don't think Sharon's got a microphone.
Okay.
Yes, she is from NatWest.
Let me dig into a little bit more detail then. Maybe that will help explain more. So I guess maybe what Sharon is getting at is there a more complex way maybe of suggesting what the relationships are here? So here we've got a selector with name and group, and they are added together. So could we do an OR version of this? Could we say maybe the name or the group was valid? The way to do that, you would have to have a different selector with its own overrides attached to it. So you'd have to have another selector which said what the other option was. So that's the situation we're at the moment. So if you want something a bit more complex in terms of what the selectors were, then we'd probably have to have a chat with you and try and understand what your specific scenario was. And if you do need something a bit more like that, we'd obviously appreciate your feedback. And if you want to get in contact with either Nick or myself directly, then we'll be able to try and get you an answer. So, if you do have follow-up there, we will try and follow up with you and take that requirement on board.
Okay, I think if you go on ahead now with the rest, we'll sort it out later.
Excellent. So I'm just looking at Sharon's got another comment. So in the file selector, DD name file star, but not file 12 or file 22. Okay, yeah, I think we'll have to come back for a more complex case, Sharon, and we'll try and follow back up with you. Do we have a contact detail for that, Nick?
We'll get that.
Excellent. Okay, that's fine. We'll try and answer it offline then. Brilliant.
Okay.
Okay, so let's carry on then. So as well as the substrings, we also have the ability to inject substrings into the symbols. Sorry. So in this case, we have a situation where we want to take the tran class, we're going to override the tran class, provide a prefix. We're going to use the CICS Apple ID symbol, but here we're saying left square bracket 0:1, right square bracket, and that's saying that we want to take index 0, which is the first character in the Apple ID, and end the substring at the second character with a 0 index. So we would get the first two characters for Apple ID, and that would become the first two characters of the prefix. That would become the prefix for the tran class. And then in the file resource type, we have another override here, and we've got a DS name. And this time we're setting the DS name to the user, and we're saying the CICS ID. We're taking index 2, which is character 3, for a length of 2 bytes. So the character 3 and 4 will be copied into the dataset name after user dot. And so in that way, we can take our symbols, but we can also reuse them and provide a little bit. We can provide, like, if you've got naming conventions, for example, based on Apple IDs or things like that, we can certainly pick those off and try and use them within the support and overrides. And so bringing all this together, we end up with a resource overrides file, which looks a bit like this. So it starts with schema version, which just points to the schema that you wish to use to validate your resource overrides file, and that is normally dictated by what release of CICS you're on and what level of support is available in that CICS release for the different schemas, and that's described in the Knowledge Center in a bit more detail. We also have that resource override key field, which wasn't there before when we were looking at examples, but that's really just the high level surrounding structure that encompasses all the resource types that we've seen already. And so these all come together to provide a resource overrides file. So actually using resource overrides, to take advantage of them, you have to opt in. So definitely an opt-in model. You don't get any resource overrides processing unless you ask for it. With CICS 5.6, the way to activate those feature toggles is, to activate the feature is through a feature toggle. So in this case, we have a com.ibm.cics.resourceoverrides.file equals myoverrides.yaml, and that will specify the name of the resource overrides YAML file that you wish to use as your resource overrides file for this CICS region. So you might have your development resource overrides, which you will toggle in here, or you might have your production environment, which may have a different set. So that's where you would specify those. The myoverrides.yaml file itself comes from is located in the USS-config directory, which is a set parameter for CICS, which you should have set, and the resource overrides subdirectory within there dictates the location for the myoverrides YAML. So we'd expect to find myoverrides YAML within that location. With the CICS Open Beta, we've actually taken that to a little bit further on. We've gone from having it a feature toggle to a real ingrained feature of CICS, and now we have a set parameter for it called res overrides. And by setting that, it's exactly the same as the feature toggle, except for it's a little bit easier to specify. And it appears in the same place, but it does exactly the same thing. It specifies the name of the resource override file you wish to apply in this CICS region. And again, we'd expect to find that in the USS config resource overrides subdirectory. There was a few questions there, I think. Let me just go through them. Do you support user symbols? Good question, Ian. So that is, you can see that we've given our symbols the prefix CICS_. So we don't currently support user symbols, but I'm sure if you raised an RFE for that, it could certainly be considered. We certainly at the time we considered that that might be something that's interesting. It's not something we currently support, but it is something that we envisage could be a request later on. So if you are interested in that, please do raise an RFE for it, and we can certainly consider it. So Leona Darling has raised the question, does this only apply to CSD resources? What about CPSM badge resources? Great, that's a brilliant question. So the thing to think about with these is resource override applies at install time, and it applies to any resource that's being installed. So any resource that can be installed in the CICS as an RDO definable type. So things like your programs, files, transactions, your IMAP, all the things you can create in your CSD can also be overridden. Now that isn't to do specifically with the CSD, it's to do generally with how CICS handles these installs. And that means that things like CPSM BAS resources that are also going to be installed are also can also be overridden here. There are a few exceptions to what can be overridden. I'm not going to talk about them in this presentation, but effectively it's things like DFH resources, although there is exceptions to that for auto install. There's also things like system install resources, which is something that CPSM will do during startup. They would also be excluded from this overrides processing. But certainly CPSM badge resources are definitely eligible here to be overridden as well. Anytime you also, after the fact, come in and install a resource through the CICS Explorer or the CPSM web user interface, again, those would also be subject to install overrides. Even if you use like a CIDA install, the same thing would apply. Anytime a resource is installed into the system, the overrides can be applied to it, with those exceptions, obviously. I hope that answers that question.
Other than that, that's about it for the moment.
Excellent. Okay, so touching a little bit back on some of this, we did just say some of this, but the resource overrides are applied at install time. At startup for CICS, we reload or load the file into the system, and that is the overrides available for that system at that point. There's no changing the file after that makes no difference. What will cause a difference though is when you restart the CICS region, as those resource override file will be reloaded back into the system. And what happens next then depends on what sort of start and what sort of resources you have. And we'll get to that in just a second. So as I said, so all resource types that can be defined with the RDO can be overridden. You should be aware there's some resources that CICS bundles can create that are not part of that set, so things like EP adapters and things like that, things that are not RDO resources but can still be defined in a CICS way through the CICS bundle. They're not included in things that can be overridden here. Although you can override a CICS bundle resource itself, because obviously you can define a bundle definition in the CSD. So just looking at the global catalog use. So when we have an initial or cold start, everything's pretty straightforward. We pick up the resource overrides file, we install the resources, we override them as we need to based on the resource overrides file, and then we catalog everything. And as we catalog things, push them into the global catalog, the overrides are also cataloged at the same time, and they will be restored during warm and emergency starts. Now, the rule for this is actually pretty straightforward. If it's cataloged, we will catalog it with its overrides. If it's not a resource that can be cataloged, or it's not going to be cataloged for some other reason, then it will not be cataloged with its resource overrides. So if that resource is then installed at startup again, it will be treated as a fresh install and the overrides will be applied. However, if the resource was catalogued, it will be restored with its overrides as you'd expect. We don't try and do anything clever. We don't try and reapply the overrides. But that does mean, though, that if the resource overrides file changed and it's a warm start and we haven't catalogued that resource, and that resource is then reinstalled, the different overrides from the new file will be applied to the uncatalogued resource. But for for catalog resources, though, that doesn't happen. They just continue on with their original catalog values. Now, one little exception here is CICS bundle resources. Now, the CICS bundle resource itself can be catalogued, but the resources that are installed via the CICS bundle don't get catalogued. And so they will also be treated as a reinstall on a warm start or an emergency start when we're bringing everything else in from the catalogue. So just watch that one. Auto install resources. So the way we handled auto install is that what you do is you don't try and override the auto installed resources themselves. What you're going to do is you're going to override the auto install model, and that will then allow you to change the model, and that obviously impacts the resources that are going to be auto installed into the system. So that's the technique to use there. There's different cataloging requirements for different resources that can be auto installed. You should understand what those whether your resources are going to be cataloged or not, and then apply the rule above that, if it's cataloged, it will be recovered with its overrides. If it's not cataloged, it will be a new reinstall, and thus it will be reapplied any new overrides. Okay, so for successful overrides, we get all the usual nice messages that you would expect from CICS. So here we are seeing us reading in the toggle. So this happens straight after the feature toggle processing happens. You'll see us saying reading resource override file. We'll give you the name of the resource override file we read in. And when they're applied in the message user, you'll get the DFH AM messages that will tell you what was applied, what attributes changed, and what the override value is. And that will allow you to understand the install of the file and then any overrides as they're applied to it. So you see here we do the overrides and then we install the file. Okay, so a successful override, you'll see an inquire, so in CMP in this case, you'll see that the change agent and the change signature is set to override. You'll also see this through the CICS Explorer, through the CPSM WUI, through any other interface that can look at the resource signature. We support this change agent override. Now, what you should understand about this is that the way that this works is that we're effectively altering the resource definition before it's installed, but the actual resource definition on the CSD or in BAS, they remain unchanged. It's just for the process of this install, we treat it like we took the resource, we changed the resource definition slightly before we installed it, and then we do the install. So the actual change itself, it will have to override, but then you'll still get all the details about where it was installed. If there was a failure during this processing, because this is very much an opt-in process, because we very much want to make sure that everything's correct, if there's a failure to parse the resource overrides file, we will terminate CICS. There'll be a message that says error detected, and then CICS will terminate. You will get the information about why we terminated in the DFH CXRF log. It comes out in that log because this is really early startup and we don't have all the usual log access that we would normally do after this point. So here you see that we've got an indentation problem on line 8 and the resource overrides file was incorrect, so we are now terminating CICS. Again, if we have an override failure, in this case, we have a job log entry that says that errors were detected while processing, CICS is terminating, and now out in message user, we have the actual processing of the overrides, and it tells you what it was trying to do, what failed. So in this case, we've tried to override a rule for program. Sorry, we've tried to create an override rule for program, and it specifies an invalid CVDA option of maybe for the attribute CEDF at line 10. So very specific about what it was we were processing, what the value was we specified, and at what line it failed on. And then here we have, another rule there's override for file. It's got invalid value. We're override. It gave me the value long file name for the resource name value at line 15. Obviously, that's an 8-byte value. So that's a failure as well. And here, CICS again has terminated. Right, so confidently overriding these things in your IDE. So I'm going to change the tack a little bit here. I'm going to switch to my other session now. Hopefully you can see my Visual Studio session. Nick, can you see that okay?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Yeah, brilliant, okay. So now what we get here is, so what I've just got a plain folder in my Visual Studio Code, and what I have is I have taken CICS, so CICS has in its USS home directory a schemas folder, and inside of that we provide a file called the resource overrides JSON schema file with a version number on it, and that is given to you so you can use it with your integrated development environment, so that you can use it with your IDE for autocomplete and hover help, and I'll show you that in just a second. And so all I've done is I've taken that file and I've placed it somewhere my editor can see it. And the second thing I've done is I have created a file called CICS overrides.yaml, but I could have called it whatever I wanted. Now, the way this works, and it's the same for most editors, is you have to tell it how to associate this specific JSON schema file with the YAML file you're interested in. And the way you do that in VS Code is you can either create a workspace or a user setting. In this case, I've got my settings file here, and all it's doing says YAML.schemas. If you find a file called star.overrides.yaml, then map that to the schema resource overrides JSON file. And so what that means is that when I open this file, which I've got here, I should get auto completion capabilities for free as soon as I start editing the file. So in this case, all I've done is I've pressed Control and space, and this works on the Mac as well. It'll work on in Linux. It'll work in any environment that supports this IDE. Now, I should point out that I'm actually using an extension here to do this because the IDE itself doesn't provide this capability. So what you need is you'll need an extension or a capability in your editor that can look at YAML and understand it, but also that can apply a JSON schema to it. So in this case, I'm using the YAML language support from Red Hat, and I just install that into my VS Code. So that would be something you'd have to set up for VS Code. And that will allow me to do all of the association with the JSON schema, plus get all this extra stuff once we're done. So in this case, I can just select my schema version. I know I need to set that. And you can see immediately two things happened. The first thing that happened was up top here, it starts reporting my schema that it's using. So its association is now complete. The CICS resource overrides JSON schema is now in effect and being applied to this file. You can see that the second thing it did was it automatically took this CICS schema version. It automatically gave it a value because it knew it only has one value for the schema version when you're using this JSON schema file. And it's pre-populated the value, so we're all set, ready to go. Now, I could change this. If I made a mistake, I could put the wrong value in, and you can see immediately it then checks for that resource override pattern. If it's not correct, it then fails out. So I have to put the right values in, otherwise it will complain. And again, you can hover over things. We've got hover help here. It tells you to specify the resource override schema version, and it gives me the right version. So we continue in this way. It automatically gives me the next option, which is the resource override. So I select that, and again, it tells me this is the resources to be overridden are list items after the resource overrides mapping. So I can now start creating this list of resources. And if I hit Control Space again, it gives me the full list of all the CICS RDO resources that are supported here. And you can see it's a full set. I think it's 37 of them, whatever it is that we've got here. So I can create like a URI map or a file or a program. I can just pick one here. And again, if I decide that actually I don't like these, I want to have my own one, my resource, it'll just tell me that's the wrong value and that property, my resource, is not allowed. Okay, so I can delete that. Oh, if I just delete all that, you can see again it's complaining a lot. And you can see down at the bottom here, I've also got the problems view, which is telling me all the things that are happening as I type them in wrong. So if I just autocomplete here, we'll type in file, and that'll come up. Now, we know we need a selector, and here we have overrides and selectors as an option, so I can just pick one of those, and it's telling me that I have an incorrect type. It expects a file selector. Basically, what it's telling me is I need more information. And so here I can pick any of the attributes I want. This, as you see, the schema understands all the CICS resources fully. It's got the attributes all available here to me at my fingertips. So I'll pick name here, and I'll be able to now specify the name of the file. So I can say like test, and that will be enough to make that work. And if I go over the amount of characters, I'll start doing it here. So if I've got the name field, the other thing I can do with name is I can also specify the is not literal and literal not options. So where I type the name test here, I can also say name is test, and that will give me the same capability. And then I can create another one and say maybe not, and I can provide obviously that doesn't make any sense, but I can put those together and that would auto complete for me. Now, if we carry on down, and I can obviously create others here if I really want to. I can also come back and we can add our override section in, and you can see it's looking for overrides already. So let's say CS name, and now I can either just set this to value, which is fine, or I can come down here and I can say, I can come down here and I can create one of our override options. So in this case, I could put a prefix in, and we could say pre dot on the start of my DS name. I could put a suffix in. So let's just go. Suffix. You see it complaining as I type in bad characters that aren't supported. So it knows what characters are supported and things as well. So if I hover over DS name, it tells me that I need a string between 1 and 44 characters. It must be A to Z, 0 to 9. Oops. And it's got a very specific character set. So if I put things that aren't in that character set in here, it'll obviously tell me off for doing that. It doesn't match the pattern. So it's quite easy to work with, quite informative, and it stops you having problems that you could later run into when you try and deploy the file. And again, here, I can do the find replace option. You can see find automatically comes out, and you can see it's telling me that I've got missing property replace. So we can do find, let's say find.prod dot, and I can then do replace, and I can do .dev dot. And so all of this, all the way along the way, has been auto-completed. It's giving me advice about what I can do. Even here, suffix, it tells me the things I can put into my suffix. Everything's hover helpable. The problems appear at the bottom. Instant feedback along the way. So very easy to get started. Very easy to play with and get the help you need straight off the bat inside your IDE without really having to do an awful lot or trying to remember what the structure of the file is, which is quite handy. So let's go back to the presentation and finish up. So I'm going to skip these. These are just in case my demo blew up in my face, but you can see all the things we've just talked about here. And we've talked about the setting up of the IDE. So we do have a requirement here to associate the schema file with our IDE. And here we have, this is the location of the file in the CICS Open Beta. So in this case, we've got the USS config, schemas subdirectory, and you'll find the resource override JSON schema there. There's a little bit more capability in the Open Beta version than we do have in the 5.6 JSON schema at the moment. It just gives you a little bit more help in terms of the types of things you can enter in. But it's, feel free to grab the Open Beta one. That will also work just fine for for whatever you want to play with and try out. Now we also have a suitable IDE YAML extension requirement. So yes, so you saw me. I have a YAML extension in my Visual Studio Code. We've mostly been using the Red Hat language server support. It has many clients that support the language server. So the language server gives you the ability to process the YAML using the language server, and it will feed back to the editors, and they can then talk to the language server and understand what capabilities they can provide in terms of auto completion and how that, to integrate with the language server, VS Code has an extension, which is one of these YAML language server clients that's available here. There's also options for Eclipse. There's also Sublime, Vim, NeoVim, and various other clients that are available supported-wise. It's quite a good set there that do support it. But basically anything that can understand YAML that also supports JSON schema in terms of to allow it to understand the structure of that YAML will work with your editor. So there's lots of options out there already. And so the final step, obviously, is that you need to tell the editor what schema to use with your resource overrides YAML file. And if you do that, it should all in theory just work. So let's talk more generally now. So we've talked a bit about the resource overrides capability. And I just want to try and help you understand what our thought process is here, how you should apply this in tandem with other capabilities that we're working on at the moment. So we're working on a few different things. So the first thing, we've obviously got resource overrides. We've talked about that. We've talked about the pipeline between development, test, and production, how to take your immutable application between these different stages without having to change the application itself, but by using overrides which are already stored in source code management that you can bring in to this configuration and to make changes in your application without actually changing the packaging itself, without having to alter your application, but just by overriding them on a per region basis. Now, the other thing we've been working on is something called the CICS Resource Builder, and we've just put that out into the CICS Open Beta at version 0.1. Now, we're anticipating a new update to that in the next few weeks. In fact, it could be soon. That will provide a next version which will provide even more support for this capability. Now, what the CICS Resource Builder does is it allows you to define your resource definitions in a YAML format. And that you can take those YAML definitions, so you take your files, your transactions, your IMAPs and your programs in YAML, and you can build them using the resource builder, turn them into DF8 CSDUP define commands, which you can then run through a DF8 CSDUP utility to update a data set, which you could then persist in the artifact repository if you wanted before you deploy the CICS region, or you could just store the DF8 CSDUP output commands and then provision using those. Oops, sorry, that's a little bug there. I shouldn't say DF8 CSDUP utility. But the point is that we want to take your YAML definitions, treat them as code, just like any other application source code. And where we would build where we'd compile our source code, not using the GSDUP utility, please don't do that, but using whatever compiler or linker combination you want. And you'll store those artifacts in your application as your application in whatever repository you want to store them in before they are provisioned into your environment. In the same way you would do that with your source code, with your resource definition YAML file, you would treat them just like normal source. They would sit in the source code repository with your other application codes. You would build them out using the CICS Resource Builder into your commands, which you could then either use to store themselves, the CSDUP commands themselves, or you will use them to create the CSD data set and then provision that with your CICS regions. And then at that point, again, you could take your production resource definition and use resource overrides in tandem with this resource builder tool to make sure you have an immutable production ready application that you're going to apply the resource override to bring it in to make it work with your development environment. So that was kind of the high level here. So if you want to make changes to your application that matter, that are to deal with differences between different target environments, hence title of this presentation, then you should look at resource override. If you want to bring your application resources back into the application source control, and again, there may be some concerns around the management of that, and again, keep your eyes peeled for the CICS Open Beta update for the resource builder tool in the next few weeks, because we intend to bring something out that takes that management of the resource definitions to the next level again. We're going to bring all that together. So if you want to create the resources in source code management, use the resource builder tool. And then if you want to have differences in those resources as they flow through different pipelines, that's really where resource overrides comes in to handle your install time requirements for each environment. Okay, so when is it available? Well, it's available right now. So we introduced resource overrides into the continuous delivery stream of CICS 5.6 via APAR PH30590. Or if you have the open beta, you can pick it up right now. It's available in the open beta today, as is the CICS resource builder at 0.1. You can go to the website and you can download the zip file which has the resource builder tool in it. And again, keep your eyes open for that update. It's about to come. And if you need any more information, there's bags of information about this on the Knowledge Centre for 5.6 and also for the open beta, which will cover the new symbols and such things like that. So please do go look at the Knowledge Centre and have a little read about it. It's structured quite nicely in the Knowledge Centre in the configuration section, and it provides quite a lot of detail about how to use the syntax of resource overrides and how it's meant to be used in practice, and all the exceptions about what can and can't be installed with CICS bundles and cataloging. It covers all of that in quite a lot of detail, which is, if you need a bit more information on that, then please do go reference it there. So with that, I'm about 10 minutes before my stop time, which should allow some time for extra questions. Please do submit your session feedback. The link is at the back of the slides, as you can see. And apparently also think about becoming a member of GSE UK and join us in more of these conferences and maybe even participate speaking. So that's all I had to talk about. So if there is any further questions on any of this stuff, including the CICS resource builder, I'm more than happy to take questions now for as long as Nick lets me talk.
So Chris, there's been no questions added. I've been chatting with Sharon and we will get back with her and Rob about that original question, is there an or statement?
Yeah.
We'll sort that out at a later stage. Now, we have had a question while I was talking. Cool, crikey. So it's a long one. Perhaps not directly pertinent to this presentation, but IBM uses Eclipse to do some things. For example, explore, install bundles and VS Code. So VS Code is being used for others, YAML, for example. What is IBM logic behind this? Why two tools to manage CICS resources? Is it just because Eclipse is not up to the task, or some of the development of some of the artifacts? So I guess, sorry, netting that down, I was reading it for the first time myself, Chris.
No, I've read through it myself. I think that's a really good question, and let me answer it this way. So I think it's not that we are not supporting Eclipse here. Eclipse is absolutely supported with this approach, and there are extensions that I've listed here in the Red Hat language server supports Eclipse, and you can go in and try it out through Eclipse as well if that's your environment. The reason for VS Code at the moment is because it's been really we wanted to try out different environments, and we already had VS Code installed, and we're trying out that, and it's just naturally been the way we've been playing with it. It's really, the extension for VS Code is really good. We've had some experiences with Eclipse which haven't been ideal, I would say, in terms of the YAML integration, but I don't know if that's just us yet or not. We are talking to the Eclipse team about that, and we'll continue to follow up and discuss any issues we've seen. But certainly the intention here is to support Eclipse just the same way we support VS Code. We're only using VS Code because it's what we have, where we're using at the time. It's one of the development environments we have used. We do intend to go look at other editors as well. I think that's something we've been talking about recently, is that we probably need to diversify a little bit further into editor experiences and just feel that pain a little bit more and make sure we get feedback to any of the editor development teams so we can make sure everyone has a good experience regardless of what their base editing experience is. So Eclipse is definitely a very much part of our direction here. And you know, if you're using Eclipse with the Explorer but installing bundles, we would expect to support all this stuff in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the nature of interfaces that they will evolve, and we've all seen different interfaces come over the years. And indeed, at the moment, probably there's a selection of what you want to use. But I think YAML for me is a good choice because it's quite descriptive of the definitions. And the thing that was pointed out to me that's different to some of the other formats is you can put comments in it, which makes life a lot easier. And in that respect, I guess it's fairly platform agnostic, isn't it? It's just a source protocol in text.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So no, I mean, even if you don't go down, I mean, all the nice JSON schema stuff I showed you with the autocomplete and hover help, none of that is essential. That's nice to have, and all editors more or less support editing YAML with that structure in mind. What you get extra with the extensions, really, when you start really digging into what extra capability you can get, is you get that nice auto completion, the understanding of the CICS resources and what fields are available. But you don't need that to do you don't need that to make these changes. Any YAML editor can, or even just text editor by itself, could make these changes as long as you stick to the YAML format when you do it. So I've just seen another question come up here from Sharon. Is the implication here that def should be coded to production standards from the get-go and overrides used across different testing environments to make the def suitable in that environment? Yes, that's a really good question. So yes, that is exactly. I think that's like the ideal, that you have your banking application or whatever application it is you've got that's production ready, and then you don't really need to have any resource overrides for it. In fact, I don't know if the previous picture actually shows it, but you might notice that there's a little grey line here with the prod overrides, because really, ideally, you'd like to think that you don't need any of these. But I think if we're realistic and we're being pragmatic, like I said at the start, that you probably will have some overrides here as well, but not necessarily. And it's just the nature of how we have production environments. Quite often they do have some very specific things that are set that you might need to be tolerant of. And so there might be that, or it might be that you need to take advantage of some of the symbols. So there's no expectation you have a production override file here in production, but it might just be part of the nature of what you're doing that it actually turns out to be the realistic choice. It's not necessarily a bad thing you have that there. If the reasons are correct, I think you just need to be careful that you don't get into a slippy ground of just trying to override it because because of other practices you're taking on. Maybe development they do have a little one or two things that shouldn't really be valid in production in the resources, and maybe you're trying to tolerate that. That to me would be a smell, and maybe we need to go back and look at the development practice rather than trying to have an override for it. So I think just a little bit of a reality check that production might still have its own concerns that needs to be different, but the ideal yes would be that you don't have any overrides in production, and your application should be coded for production standards.
Yeah, and I think that's a bit of a change to maybe how a lot of environments have evolved. Certainly in our space, we've got a lot of virtualization in the test space and a lot of tweaks because there's the nearer you get to unit test, there's a lot more environments, and there's just one environment in production. So I think there's a lot of mileage with this. We're working on this quite extensively at the moment. Cloud type environments, automated testing deployments, automated project deployments as well for definitions, and this fits in all that space. It's just for us how we're going to fit it in. So there's probably a bit of mileage in having some long chats offline, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. I see this absolutely as the way you should see this, like the way you should understand what we're saying here. The positioning of this is that we are trying to bring everyone forward and make progress in terms of the environments that they are working and building out, so that you can build best practice production environments that have nice flowing pipelines that do continuous integration, you've got continuous delivery, whatever it is you want to get out of your environment. You should be able to find a capability in CICS or a tool to support it to help you treat CICS just like any other application flowing through the system in a best practice way.
Yeah. Terrific. Well, I've really enjoyed this session, Chris. I don't think we've got any more questions. I'm sure we may get a few offline, but we can always carry on those conversations. It doesn't have to finish right now. But it's 11:30. I know a lot of you will want a lunch break before coming back, maybe to listen to Zach at 2:00, talk about performance.
Rob, can I just jump in and
Go on.
put a little advert in for Thursday morning, 10:30? We've got a whole bunch of the CICS guides from the Hursley Lab joining for a Q&A, Chump the Chimp session. So get your questions ready, prepare. It's a unique opportunity to get hold of some of the experts, the guys who actually write the code, who are making the strategic decisions where we're going forward. So please think of some good questions for the Thursday session. Thanks, Rob.
Okay, thanks, Nick, and thanks again, Chris, and see you all at 2:00. Cheers, folks. Bye-bye.